Hello and greetings from UB. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, we are delighted you are able to join us for today's webinar presentation. My name is Christy Fields and I manage the Alumni's Careers and Lifelong Learning program here at UB. And I am also joined by my wonderful colleague Joy Rona, who will be assisting with any questions that you may have during today's presentation. We are both so grateful you are able to join us today, and we hope you and your family are staying well. It is my honor to welcome today's featured presenter, Min-Hsuan Tu. Min-Hsuan is an assistant professor of organization and human resources in the University of Buffalo School of Management. She has a PhD from the University of Florida and also conducts research focusing on power and leader mistreatment in the workplace, with the ultimate goal of finding simple and helpful techniques to develop better leaders and high quality employee relationships. In today's session, Min-Hsuan will discuss why some leaders abuse their power, why we may tolerate abusive leaders more often than we think, how abuse causes harm to victims, even the abusers themselves, and how to create an environment free of abuse. We will leave some time during today's webinar for Q&A. If you have any questions during the presentation, please submit them through the GoToWebinar taskbar question section on your screen, and feel free to chat those to us at any time. In addition, we are going to record today's session, and we will all send you a copy within the next 24 hours. With that said, it's my pleasure to turn it over to our featured presenter, Min-Hsuan Tu.
Thank you, Christy, and hello, everyone. Hope you are doing well during this pandemic. It's really a challenging and weird time. I really appreciate the chance to talk with you today about this important topic of abusive bosses in the workplace. And I'm flattered by the number of people who signed up for this webinar. Thank you, and hope we will all have a good time. So before I started, I just want to kind of briefly introduce myself and share with you how I have developed my interest in abusive leaders. So as Christy already mentioned, I did my master and PhD at University of Florida. So I stayed there for about 8 to 9 years and moved from the very south of the country to the very north to Buffalo last fall. I'm very interested in power and abusive leaders, but those interests are kind of centered to the questions that I want to answer about how can we do to help employees develop positive relationships at work. So many people were curious about why I study abusive leaders. Many of my colleagues, they are interested in more positive type of leadership behaviors like servant leadership or humble leadership. And why study abusive leaders? Many people ask me, oh, so are you studying yourself? AKA, are you abusive? So, well, that's not all about me. If I'm studying myself, in today's webinar, probably will be talking about something like attractive leaders, not abusive leaders. Okay, this was supposed to be a joke. Usually my students will laugh here. As I cannot see your face, I would just assume you laugh. Anyway, about 6 years ago, one of my friends, she was working with an abusive boss who frequently called his employees slaves in front of others, as it was funny. He asked his employees to take care of his garden when he traveled. He even asked my friend to learn tennis because he needed someone to play with him. And not to mention, there's a lot of humiliations. A lot of time he yelled at my friends, telling her that she's stupid. A lot of those things happening during that time, and I observed how abusive leaders could hurt people around them. And my friend had a depression at that time, which made me feel very sorry for her. And I really want to know more about abusive leaders. So when I developed my research interest during my PhD, I just want to know more about this phenomena and to learn more about how to create an abusive-free environment in general. So in today's webinar, I just wanted to share with you what research, including some of my research study, says about abusive leaders. So why some leaders abuse their power, how abuse causes harms to the victims, and how to create an environment free of abuse from different angles and different perspectives. So let's start with to talk about what is an abusive leader. Dr. Bennett Tapper at Ohio State University gave some example of abusive behaviors. So for example, leaders yell at their employees, inappropriately blaming them for the things that they didn't do, taking credits for their employees' work, and putting them down in front of others. There are other more examples, but these are really commonly seen in the workplace. According to a survey conducted by Workplace Bullying Institute, there 27% of Americans workers reported that they were abused at work, while another 21%, although they did not get abused, they witnessed abuse at work. And abusive bosses are universally common in other countries as well as Canada and many countries in Europe and South Africa. So all this is saying abuse happens in our daily life and probably around many of you, just similar to my experiences that I shared earlier. So although most of us will agree that abuse is bad, and we will say organizations should take some actions to create an abuse-free environment, we might actually tolerate and accept abusive leaders more often than we think. So let's look at some of the examples. So this is Steve Jobs, the Apple co-founder. He might be one of the most successful CEOs, and because of his success, many entrepreneurs also view him as a role model, like he inspired them to pursue this career and being entrepreneurs. Steve Jobs is not an easygoing leader, though. He believes a tough and brutal leadership style can bring benefits. So he often criticized employees' idea, seldom showed appreciation, and disregarded the feelings of other people. So you probably learned a lot of this information from the newspaper or when he passed away. There's a book about him. Many people who work with him have describing him as, so this is a quote, a very intense person who had rough edges and was nasty at times and mean. So apparently, Steve Jobs is a very successful leader, but also his leadership style may somehow fitting into the abusive leader that we talk about. Here is another example, Bobby Knight. He is a former American basketball coach, and he's also very successful. He is very impressive. Like he's one of the 2 coaches to win over 900 games and won the NCAA championship 3 times. He is also known, though, for his tough leadership behavior, such as he will humiliate and threatening the players. In his mind, he thinks this is just a way to motivate or help his players to play well in the games. So now you can see these 2 leaders that we just talked about, Steve Jobs and Bobby Knight. What do they share in common? So first of all, they are all star performers. They are very successful. They are winners in their field. Bobby Knight and Steve Jobs are often praised by the popular press, the newspaper, or in a lot of social media that they were considered as role models, and their leadership behavior might sometimes be viewed as tough love. So it's just a way to motivate people rather than abusive. And for both of them, abuse seems to be the key to their own success. So here comes the questions about, is this really a tough love? Like using abuse to motivate people, and the leaders just want to develop the subordinates through this abusive way, or this is just pure abuse? According to research, Some people believe abuse could be the way to motivate employees and enhance performance. So in other words, some people view this abusive behavior as a form of organizational politics that facilitate positive outcome. It's just a way that the leader could do to get what they want. So this is very interesting because in other words, while some employees might view their supervisors as abusive leaders, others might just actually think this is a tough love and view their same supervisor as a motivator. So this is all in our head. This all depends on how people perceive the leader's behavior to kind of see it as more abuse or like more like a motivation. So what does that telling us? Research has found that when employees view their leaders' abusive behaviors as a necessarily evil or a strategy to push for better performance, they're more likely to accept the abuse. So, as we mentioned earlier, some people would just view this is just something to motivate me, and they are okay with the abuse. In one of my study, my co-authors and I found that when subordinates view their abusive and successful leaders as the role models. So they identify with them. They think their behaviors are something they want to like mimic. Some of them are more likely to learn the same abusive behaviors, and then they become the next generation of abusive leaders. So they also treat their followers or people around them in the same way. So as you can see here on the slides, I kind of have this picture and figures here to illustrate. This is something we call the trickle-down effect. So in the workplace, when we observe the leaders and what their behavior look like, we think that it's something encouraged or accepted by the environment or the company. As the result, we view them as the role model. And if our role model happens to be abusive and successful leaders that we think could motivate us, we're more likely to accept their abuse and become the next generation of abusive leader. So this is the phenomena like really established in a lot of study that show this trickle down effect. So now comes to the question though. So we talk about employees might view their abusive leader as motivators and can help them to increase their success. So how does evidence or research say about this? Does abuse really boost success as what some people believe? So here is a result from only one study. So there might be more, but just one coming in, but only one study find that if there's a moderate level of abusive behavior, then employees' creativity will increase. So this is what this figure is showing here. If we have a moderate amount of abusive behaviors, employee will be more creative. But if you have little or too much abuse, the creativity will decrease. So this kind of telling us, okay, so maybe a little or some level of abuse might be helpful. However, that's only basing on one study that I'm showing you. More and more studies are actually demonstrated that abuse is harmful to people around them, like the victims, of course, and also hurt the leader's team and the whole organizations. So having an abusive boss really makes work miserable. Those victims of abuse, those subordinates, they perform poorly. They also wanted to quit their job. They're engaging in more counterproductive behavior, such as they are more likely to stealing or cheating at work. They also suffer from health issues. So there are just so many things, so many negative outcomes for abusive behaviors. And in addition to those victims, Having abusive leaders also reduces the team's overall productivity and harms the firm performance overall. So researchers have estimated the annual cost associated with abusive boss. And here's the number. It's about $23.8 billion per year, which is quite a huge number. But of course, it takes into account about the loss of productivity, healthcare cost, and a lot of things associated with this abusive behavior. But you can see this is a very impactful thing that happens at work. And researcher also have a really clear picture that abuse actually causes far more harm than the potential benefits that are shown previously in one of the study. So if abusing others didn't boosted the success and help those people to improve their performance, here might come interesting questions. Do abusive leaders gain some personal benefits from doing so? So maybe this behavior doesn't really help the subordinates, but does it help the leaders themselves? So here are some of the evidence. So one study have shown leaders who have some dark traits. Dark traits include something like, for example, narcissist and psychopathy are more likely, those people are more likely to get ahead at work. So get ahead means that they can get promoted, they can move to the top of the corporate ladder quicker. And this suggests that maybe being tough or abusive or being behaving in this negative way might help people to get what they want and help them with their career advancement. However, there are also studies showing that those people's success comes at a cost. So abusive leaders are aware of their behaviors and thus feel guilty. So in like a few studies, including my and my co-authors, we found that abusive leaders actually know their behavior is wrong and they feel guilty after those behaviors. And in my research, our team found that when leaders abuse their power, so when they engaging in those abusive behavior, they suffer at home in the evening. So basically, they keep reflecting about what they have done. They feel less relaxed, actually. They feel less likely to relax at home or forget about work. And they also feel a reduced sense of well being. So, what does that say is although some evidence suggested that maybe abusive leaders they got some benefits from doing this abusive behavior because it might help them to get what they want so they can achieve the goals and get promoted somehow. However, there's also evidence showing that this is also not good for themselves. They're also suffering. They're suffering from their health and they also have a lot of emotional burdens by engaging in those behaviors. So clearly, taking from what we talk about, abuse didn't help abusing employees doesn't help them to improve their performance and also doesn't help leaders that much. So abusive leaders are very dangerous to keep and probably do no good to anyone, really. But as what we talk about, we might actually tolerate and accept abusive leader more often than we think because we feel like actually we see a lot of successful leaders who are abusive and that may be their secret to be successful. So as my co-author and I concluded in our research, when we have successful and high performing leaders who are allowed to abuse, such as they're promoted, they're not punished by their behavior because they're too valuable to lose. Organizations actually create an environment for abuse to grow. These successful leaders will signal to others. So this is not just about themselves. They actually signal to others that abuse may be a way to get successful. And people will tolerate their behavior, accept their influence, and even become the next generation of abusive leaders. And this might be dangerous because many of these new generation leaders might just be abusive. Might not be successful at all. So you have a lot of abusive leaders in your company or organization, which further foster this toxic and abusive environment. As abuse brings very limited benefits and much greater harm, it is very important to make sure that those successful and high-performing leaders are not really encouraged at work, which we'll talk more in the following slides. Okay, so what should we do to create an abuse-free environment? So I think this is a very, very big topic and probably cannot provide all the answers to you, but let me share some of the ideas in the literature and then brainstorm some of the possible practice that we could do to create an environment, free of abuse. So to answer these questions about what should we do to create an abusive-free environment, let's talk about why leaders abuse. So if we can understand the reasons, that can help us better think about a way to reduce those behaviors to happen at work. So first, this is all about who the leaders are. So this is about the leaders' personality, their traits, or their own belief. Some people are just more likely to be an abusive leaders. So for example, studies have shown that when some people feel more psychological entitled, which means that they think they deserve better treatment from other people, they deserve like people to pay attention to them, those kind of entitled feelings will make them more likely to abuse others. In addition, when people hold a belief that leaders needs to be pushy or domineering. So it's not like everybody believe people should be very nice or very soft. Some people, if they hold a belief that leaders have to be domineering and pushy, they're actually more likely to abuse others as well. Just because those behavior, the abusive behavior, are congruent or consistent with their personality, their trait, or what they think it's the right thing for leaders to do. So if this is the problem, if the problem of abuse is because we have abusive leaders and this is about the leaders themselves, their personality, their traits, just don't hire them. Or if you have those people at work, you should fire them. So I know sounds very hard to do sometimes. While we're talking to many managers, many people might wonder whether they could find somebody who are equally brilliant and successful. So if we think about Steve Jobs or Bobby Knight, can we really find someone who are equally smart and they are high performing, but they are not abused? So let's go back to Bobby Knight's example. There's a Harvard Business case that they discusses Bobby Knight and Coach K, as they are probably the two most successful basketball coaches in the nation. Both of them are equally talented and successful, but their leadership style is very different. So Bobby Knight, he believes in tough love, brutal, and then he believes that could actually make the players to behave the best of themselves. But Coach K relies on positive communication, and he works hard trying to support and develop the players. So as you can see, here is a quote that he say about his leadership style or how he view his team. It's all about the heart, about the family, and it's all about how to bring the good in people and bring the most out of it. So that's his belief, and you can see their behavior, their philosophy about leadership are just so different, but they are also both are very successful. Their success are very similar. So it is not hard to find somebody who might be equally brilliant, successful, but not abuse. And as we talked about earlier, abuse brings more harm than we actually see. So this is a very important things to kind of think about when you're doing selections, recruitment, and when you're evaluating your leaders. Okay, so here comes the second reasons. So why leaders abuse? Another reason provided by the literature is that, by the research, is that leaders might see the benefits of doing it, like abusing others. They might consider abuse as a necessary means to fulfill their responsibility. So for example, imagine that you're working with a very difficult employee who's performing poorly. You might want to be a little harsh sometimes, just because you feel like that's a way to push that person to perform better. However, research has shown that abusing others sometimes involve risk, such as you might receive retaliations or revenge from the subordinates, which kind of suggested that leaders only abuse people when the environment shows these behaviors are okay or even legitimate. So our earlier example of successful and abusive boss can well explain this perspective. Another example will be there are so many companies that are notorious for their toxic and abusive environment. When a company have those kind of environment, culture that signal abuse, that will make the managers think the abuse is acceptable. So in this case, what should we do? So think about whether your company is rewarding A while hoping for B. So this is an idea about that your company say they want to have certain type of leader, but their promotion system or rewarding system actually doing the opposite. So one of the classic example is Aaron. So as you can see here, in their company's vision and value, they emphasize so much on building a respectful environment with integrity, have good communications that encourage excellency. However, in reality, their culture has been described as winner-take-all culture and press cooker culture, which means that they just emphasize a lot on the outcome, but not pay too much attention about how they achieve the outcome. So this might encourage the leaders to cross the line and be abused because they feel like I can do whatever it takes to achieve the goal, and I will be rewarded if I'm successful. So this is important to make sure and to think about that organization does not only care about the outcome. So this is not suggesting the outcome is not important, but this is more like in addition to focusing on the outcome, organization also need to pay attention to what it takes to achieve that goal and does not reward abuse bosses, such as promoting those abusive and successful leaders to a leadership positions that will signal to them that this is okay and they actually got rewarded for being abused. Okay, so the last reasons that why leaders might abuse. The last question is more about leaders who might temporarily abuse because they can't control themselves and withhold their aggressive outbursts. For this category, those are leaders who are like general public. They don't believe that abuse is necessary, and it's not about they see the benefits of being abused. It's just about the environment that kind of making them being abused. So let's talk more. Research has suggested that everyone could potentially be abusive. And this is very interesting because another part of research also shows that most people know what makes a good leader. So a lot of studies showing that when we survey people, from college students, from working professionals, or people who are managers in higher level, when we ask them what do they think an ideal leader look like, and give them some of the words that describe a leader, people knows what makes a good leader, and they are positive words such as being sensitive, being helpful, being sincere, dedicated, energetic, those good words. And they can know, they also think a good leader or ideal leader should not be, for example, selfish or very dominating others. So although those evidence suggested that most people know what makes a good leader, but when people have a bad day, have a bad mood, such as dealing with difficult employees, under the performance pressures or time pressures, people are more likely to mistreat others. And this is very understandable. So just like what the picture here illustrated, that which I like a lot, we all want to be a good person at work. We want to be a good leader. We know what a good leader looks like. But sometimes it's just so hard for us to be our best self as we will hope. So a few years ago, in one of my projects, we asked managers that are enrolled in the MBA program about when and why they might engaging in this abusive behavior or mistreat others. Many of them actually said, just as what we talk about, sometimes when they are overworked, when they are overwhelmed and stressful, it is just very hard for them to control. They will be sarcastic, and they might yell at their subordinates just because they are in a bad mood. And they also say this is not something they associate themselves with. So they know this is wrong, but they just cannot control themselves what they should do. So if this is the reason for leaders that they cannot control themselves, that they might be abused sometimes, what should we do to help those leaders? So some of the study have suggested many different ways that we could help leaders to boost their energy, reduce stress, and also improve their well-being. So if we can help them to feel less stressful, or generally just having a better situation, like state, then they could treat their employees in a different way. So for example, here are some of the um, examples that to share. Employees could take like some micro breaks at work. They can do stretching. Maybe they can walk around the office during the break and chatting with each other. Could practice some mindfulness, and share their negative thoughts with others. So those are practice or intervention that universally could help leaders or just employees to reduce their stress, boosting their energy, and engaging more at work. And if those could happen, we might help the leaders reduce their stress, feel less exhausted, and they could better control their negative emotions and potentially withhold their aggressive impulses and not being abused. In addition to this intervention, and of course, there are a lot of different ways, such as exercise, yoga, meditation. There are a lot of ways that we could do. But next, I would like to share with you one of my study. And in this research, I have developed an intervention that hopefully will help leaders control themselves and reduce abusive behavior on a daily basis. So this study is still ongoing, but I have some initial results that I really want to share with you. I recruited about 85 leaders and their subordinates, about like 200 or 290 subordinates. They participate in this study for 2 weeks. So for two work days, throughout 10 days, they fill out multiple surveys every day to report their feelings at the moment and their daily behaviors. Every morning, the leaders were asked to do a self-reflection, and here is what I asked them to do. Specifically, they're asked to think about themselves as a leader at their retirement party in the future, and they have to imagine this is a very positive um, future for them. Like everything has worked out, they achieve whatever they want to get, and they become the kind of leader they want to be. So this is a ideal stage that they realize their potential as a leader and become the leaders that they want to be. So we also ask them to think about how others will remember them, and it's kind of like how what they do to those people and how they will talk about working with you during the retirement party. And in the literature, we call this best future self. So best future self is your image about who you want to become in the future. And in this study, it's more about who people want to become in the future as a leader at the very end of their career. So as you can see here, this is something we asked them to do, and we hope to activate leaders' best future self. So when they constantly think about the type of the good leader that they want to become, they want to be remembered, hopefully that will motivate them to monitor their daily behaviors. So they were going to think about whether those abusive behavior they want to engage conflicting with this positive image they're in mind, and they probably will withhold their aggressive outbursts, impulses, and not being abusive. So that's kind of the background for this research ideas and how it comes out. So I want to share with you some results. So here are the initial results from the first part of the data I have collected. So in week 1, the leaders didn't do the best self intervention. So only in week 2, they did the self-reflection, think about themselves as a leader in the future at the retirement party. And as you can see here from the bars, when leaders did the intervention in week 2, they feel less exhausted and they are more other oriented. So that's exhausted. It's how we measure it. We're asking them, do they think that they are drained right now? They are mentally exhausted and cannot function well. And they feel less exhausted in week 2 when they do the intervention. For other orientation, it's more a motive or like a motivation that we ask them. So are you thinking about your subordinates' goals, their personal needs, their personal feelings? And in this study, we found when people reflecting on the future self, they're more likely to focus on other people's goals and needs. And furthermore, I found that when leaders feel less depleted, so when they feel less exhausted and less tired, they engage in less abusive behavior. So this is kind of echoing with the background or the idea, kind of support the idea of this research as when leaders reflecting on their best future self, they feel less exhausted because somehow their energy got boosted. They have more motivation being a leader, which help them to control their aggressive feelings and also the behavior that they want to enact it on a daily basis. And as a result, in our study, it's very good to see those leaders actually behaving in less abusive behaviors. So all these are possible interventions that we could do to help the leaders to increase in their well-being, to boost their energy, make them feel more motivated when they're in this leadership position, and help them to self-control better a little bit. I know work is very stressful, but help them a little bit on the daily basis and help them to be a better self. So the reason why I want to share my study with you, in addition to those interventions from the literature, is the idea of starting from ourselves. So when we talk about how to create an abuse-free environment, we talk about what organization could do, what we can do in selection, promotion, or recruiting, but we could also do it starting from us. Being a leader is, of course, not easy, and being a good leader is even harder. And it's important for us to do something like from ourselves to change our behavior. So as shown in my study, even doing this short intervention every morning, like reflecting on this 2 to 3 minutes, could actually change our behavior, how we treat other people, how we view the environment. So if we could constantly reflecting on ourselves and probably think about what kind of person, what kind of leader we would like to become in the future, then we together could create a work environment free of abuse. So this is something we could do from ourselves, and also as a manager or as a higher level manager, what our organization could all do together to improve our workplace, especially during this very stressful situations that we're experiencing now around the world. It is very important about how we treat other people, how we develop and support each other, and creating a better environment that people enjoy working. So if you're interested in learning more about abusive leaders, there are a lot of resources online. Here are just some of the articles that I collected that you might be interested in checking out. There are also some books. The books I listed here are written by a Stanford professor. And then he including a lot of evidence from research similar to what we talk about. And I think that's very helpful if you want to learn more about this topic. Okay, so I hope my webinar today is helpful to you. It's just a very brief summary about abusive leaders and what we know from literature and what we could do to creating an environment that are positive. So if you would like to learn more about abusive leaders or just leader development, anything about power, leadership in general, feel free to contact me. I'm always looking for research partners. So thank you. And then now I will give it back to Christy.
Excellent. Thank you so much, Min-Hsuan, for sharing all of your research and the great findings and the information. You did touch on one question already because we did have something come through in regards to resources and books. So thank you so much for sharing the great resources that individuals can tap into as well, since I know that was a question for some. We do have a couple of questions that have come through. So Min-Hsuan, the first question, what about the subordinates who are fearful of reporting their supervisor's abusive behavior? What advice do you have?
Yeah, oh, that's a great idea. So for my previous research, I was thinking about what should I do on a research about what an employee should do to reduce or help reduce the abusive behavior of their boss. And I talked with my colleague and advisor, and I think the best suggestion is actually leaving the toxic environment. I know this is probably not very practical. Many people could really not leave the environment because they need this salary or they have to work with this boss. But I think the best advice is to leave this person. And I think there's no perfect answer for this because they depends on so many factors. But one thing could do is to think about whether this leaders is a long-term abuser or just a short-term abuser. So if a long-term abuser, like I mentioned, that person, it's about the personality. Probably it's better to leave that person. But if you are working with a temporary abuser, so people who only abuse you sometimes because under pressure, when there's some uncertainties in the environment, then see if your relationship is fine enough that you could communicate with that person that to let him or her know this behavior is not appreciated and then not something you like. In some of the study, though, some employees do have they talk to their colleagues and trying to talk to their supervisor as a group. So it's not just about that single employees, but talk to the supervisor as they are a group of people who thinks that the behavior is not appropriate, and that really help reduce abusive behavior. But like what I say, I think this is a very complicated question to answer basing on so many situations. But perhaps the first step is to identify what type of leaders are. Can you leave that person? But if not, is communication a way to do so?
Great. Thank you so much, Min-Hsuan. And I know there's another similar question, very much surrounding that same topic. But just to kind of take this next question too, if you have already addressed it in your one-on-one session with your leader and to HR, any other suggestions? Do you feel like it's definitely the right step to resign and move to another job?
Yeah, I would say, of course, I could not speak too much about how we decided to leave the work or not. In many situations, people actually could not leave the work. So, in the beginning of the presentation, I mentioned my friend. She could not leave um, her boss because at that time he has to stay. She has to stay for 5 or 6 years of the contract. So there's nothing he can do. She can do, but only just kind of endure, just suffering in that situation. So I think, of course, in my opinion, the best solution will be leaving that toxic environment, because if you think you already talked to the boss and also the HR, but no actions was taken, it might signal that this environment tolerate abuse in general, and they're not going to do anything to help improve the situation. So it might make more sense to leave this environment and go somewhere else. And as I mentioned, I think there's always a better place that are equally good and equally supportive, but you can work on, you don't have to work with abusive boss. So that would be my suggestions.
Excellent. Thank you. And then, Minshan, the next question that's been submitted is the word abuse a too subjective word, such as public criticism is also considered abuse and may not be by others?
Exactly. So that's a great question. I didn't talk too much in the webinar, but in the studies and in a lot of discussions in academia, actually, we talk so much about what is abuse and how we define it. So as what how about this question, abuse, it's actually very subjective. So some people might think this person is abusive, while another people might not. Some of the example I choose here, for example, Steve Jobs or Bobby Knight, they are provided as example just because it's not just one single person. There's a group of people thinking in that way, but again, it's still perceptions. It's their perception that they are those leaders are engaging in abusive behaviors. But of course, this could be some people might actually not seeing those behavior as abuse. If they accept those abusive behavior, they probably would not feel like this is abuse anyway. They just feel like maybe this leader is so close to me, so he can do whatever he wants. We have a good relationship, but not he's trying to abuse me. So as what back to this question, yes, indeed, this is more about a perception and very subjective. So it's all about how people view it, but I think that also signal to leaders that it is very important that you communicate well and make sure you understand how people actually feel and perceive your behavior, not just about how you feel, but how others feel.
Great. Thank you, Minshan. The next question is a little bit of a comment and then asking you if you agree or disagree. So, this person has experienced in the past that abusive managers are themselves sometimes insecure or threatened by their subordinates, being more knowledgeable than themselves, and try to shield it by abusive behavior. Do you agree with this?
Um, so I will actually agree with this statement, or generally agree. There's actually a lot of evidence in the research that's showing that sometimes leaders abuse just because it's a reactions to the employees' behavior. So, for example, some employees are just very lazy, poor performing, and they don't know what to do. Some employees are just also very aggressive. So it is because the subordinates started this behavior, like they're aggressive, they challenge their supervisor without respect. And a lot of times supervisors didn't know what to react. So of course abuse will be a quick response that they think they should engage. So yes, there's a lot of evidence showing that sometimes it might not be how the leaders initiated, but it's all because of the subordinates. However, even though, although I agree with this, and I agree, a lot of subordinates or team members are just so hard to deal with. But I feel like this is a question about whether it is appropriate to do engaging in the same aggressive behavior if others are treating you in that way. So if your subordinate, if subordinate are treating the leaders in those aggressive way, does it make those abusive leader behavior more legitimate, or actually they're just doing this like they're also engaging in the wrong behavior as their own? So that would be my thoughts on this question.
Wonderful. Min-Hsuan, the next question that we have here, what about focusing on reducing authority and focus more on collaboration and inclusion in a work environment? Your thoughts here?
Yes, I think that's a very, very good suggestion though. So I didn't talk too much in this webinar about creating a positive environment, but actually that it's a solution for reducing abusive environment as well. So as we mentioned, a lot of time the leaders abuse just because they think the environment allows them to do so, or they see others doing it. So they feel like, okay, let's do it all together. But if you create a supportive, positive communication environment, then the leaders will feel like, okay, I cannot do in here. And if they feel like this is not environment fitting them, like they just want to be very tough, they don't want to be very supportive and soft, they will just leave the organizations because they don't see the fit. So if we could create a positive environment, you're more likely to attract people who feel like they are fitting with your culture, fitting with your environment. And then those people who don't fit because they're abusive, they don't want to, they don't feel like this soft or positive environment fit with them, they will leave your company, and that will help you to sustain a good culture in the organizations.
Excellent. And then, Min-Hsuan, the next question we have here, do you feel that bosses that could be abusing, is that how they were brought up as a child, do you believe? Do they have this emotional baggage? Have you found that in your research at all?
Yeah. Oh, that's also a great research, great question. So I feel like our audience today, they probably read a lot of research already because they touch on a lot of the angle that we're trying to understand, or we have kind of found in the literature and research. So about the background for the leaders that definitely shape them when they grow up and when they become a leader. So there's some evidence suggesting that if the leader having some experiences being abused, so they have some history that they are exposed or they are just the victim of aggression, then they're more likely to be abusive. So this is very similar to the idea we talk about when we see other people as a role model or people around us doing the same thing. We're more likely, no matter it's something you think about or you're just like not just like naturally coming out, those leaders are more likely to be abused. So not a lot of those research, but that definitely shaped the childhood experiences. Definitely shaped how the leaders behave. The other thing that shaped the leader's behavior. It's also their early experiences, like the leaders they have worked with. So before somebody moved to the managerial position, they have worked with so many leaders in their life. It might be a leaders in their family, like their father, or a leader or a supervisor when they're doing part-time job in college. Those leaders in their early stage of development, because they are usually viewed as role models, and those experiences also shape how leaders behave later on when they become a leader of their own.
Right, thank you. And then, Min-Hsuan, I think we have time for one final question today. How can a subordinate let others make others aware, especially if the abuser is targeting only a few employees?
Yeah, that's a very good question because that actually happens like very frequently around us, but also in the literature or research, we found those phenomena as well. Like there are a lot of times leaders are just targeting people, like specific people. So again, I think this will also go back to whether the person is a long-term abuser or a short-term abuser, and whether it's okay to communicate with the leader that I don't think it's right you treat certain employees in that way, or whether you have an environment that you can talk to the HR to solve these issues. The other thing, I think that would be very similar to how you like even no matter whether you are an abuser yourself, sorry, you're the victim yourself or you're witnessed this, the solution probably will be very similar. The very important thing though I will bring up here, in a lot of this line of studies, it shows that it is very important that if you could morally support these people who are suffering right now, it really helped that people to get through so they will not feel very depressed or feel very sad about them. They will feel like people are actually, there are some people supporting them, and then even though they're dealing with a very difficult situation, that's very helpful for them. And another things to bring up though is related to this question, but not directly answering it, it's a lot of studies showing that in regardless if you are a victim or you're just observer of abuse, the negative in fact is actually very consistent. So even seeing others suffering can also make you suffer too. So you will feel emotionally very attached to that person. You also feel exhausted, and that impacting our work mood and our performance. So this is something I want to share because I think this is a great question. What should we do if we see people suffering at work? In addition to directly dealing with the issue associated with the boss, perhaps what we can do is also support the people who are suffering, as this is just really bad for everyone, not just the person who's suffering, but also for everyone in the team.
Wonderful. Min-Hsuan, thank you so much for taking the time to share all the great resource you have and share all of the information that you did today. Really appreciative of your time. I know you shared a lot of great books and resources. I'll touch base with you too, and we can get those out to the group hopefully in the coming days so they can tap into some of those books and readings and research that you have recommended to them. So thank you so much. On behalf of the Office of Alumni Engagement and the UB School of Management, Min-Hsuan, thank you for giving us your time, your knowledge, and your expertise today. As a reminder, we have recorded today's session, and we're going to send it to all of you within the next 24 hours. So keep an eye on your email for that to come through. Also, we're going to take a break on Monday in observance of the Memorial Day holiday, but we'll be coming back together for another webinar on Wednesday, May 27th. We'll be joined by UB alumna Gwen Applebaum. Gwen is the Assistant Dean and Director of UB School of Management's Career Resource Center, and she's going to touch on the topic of virtual interviews. So if you are interested at all, please join us on Wednesday. More information on that upcoming webinar, as well as our full slate of June webinars, as well as our webinar archive library on our website. You'll get all of that information in the email that you do receive tomorrow with the recording. So with that said, I'll turn it back over to Min Min-Hsuan for any closing remarks.
Yes, so thanks, Chrissy, and everyone who's joined this webinar today. I hope what I shared today is helpful. If there's anything I didn't explain clearly, please feel free to reach out to me as I'm trying to fit like decades of research in one webinar. I hope it's not too intense, but I hope you guys will all we will all be doing well during this pandemic at work, and also don't have we will get rid of all the abusive boss and have a very more positive work environments together. So thank you so much.
Excellent. Thank you, Min-Hsuan. Thank you all for joining us. Min-Hsuan's email address is on her final slide if you need to reach out to her for any additional questions or follow-up. Take care, stay well, and enjoy your weekend.